So here's part 10 of the 289 rebuild. I talked a little bit about the main bearing bores here. We've got a straight edge here, and this is a precision machine straight edge. It's not just a piece of random steel that we picked up somewhere. This is one that we purchased from Quickway. And so it has machined edges on it that are perfectly flat. So in order to check the alignment on this, you can either use a bar or a straight edge, but we need to put this straight edge in here. And we need to take a 1/1000th feeler blade. Now they have feeler gauge sets. We've taken this one and separated it. And what you need to do is you need to make sure that this feeler blade does not slide easily underneath that straight edge, okay? Now I can pull it out of there. That's not what I'm looking for. I want to make sure that it doesn't slide easily, and because if these are misaligned, in other words, if these bores are not in a perfectly straight line with each other, they're misaligned, it's going to show up here. So if I can't slide that 1/1000th feeler gauge underneath any one of these mains here, that means that my alignment is right on the money. If you have 1/1000ths sliding under here, you need to get the block aligned honed because 1/1000ths is not acceptable. You can't have any misalignment here at all. If you do, your main bearings are going to wear out prematurely. And so, like we talked about in the last video, this block is perfectly true. It's a really nice builder. So we didn't have to actually do any main bore alignment on this because the alignment's exactly where it needs to be. So the next thing, you can see I've got the main caps off here. We've got our set of camshaft bearings. Now camshaft bearings, if you take a look at this box here on the Ford, well let's see, I got it upside down. So there's a little chart inside here on one of the flaps. There it is right there. And it tells you which bearing goes in which bore. If you look here, these are the positions in the block, position 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it tells you what number bearing goes in what position. On the Fords, they'll actually have a number stamped on the bearing, F18-1, F18-2, F18-3, and so forth. So it's pretty simple, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you need to make sure that you put the correct bearing in the correct bore, simply because the outside diameter of this bearing is different. The inside diameter where the cam rides is all the same, but the outside diameter of these bores is different, and so these bearings have different thicknesses on the outside. So they're progressive, and we need to make sure that they go in the right bore. So what we're going to do, we have our cam bearing tool here. We're going to start with number 5. Now the way the cam bearing tool works is it goes in and it holds the bearing here, and then we use this cone here to center the bearing up from the other end. And I'll show you how that works. So we want to start from the opposite end. So this is the front of the block facing me. So this is position number 5. So if we look on our chart here, let's lay this here. If we look on our chart here and we look at position number 5, we need bearing F18-5. So, and that's what I've got. If you look on that bearing, hopefully you can see that.
No, it's not.
It says F18-5 on it. Let's see if we can get that in the picture there.
No.
Well, trust me, it says F18-5. And your bearings will be marked. So we're just going to take our bearing. We're going to put it right down in here. Come on up in here down. Let's get right in here on this. Now, the other very important thing, we're going to put our tool in here. The other very important thing that you need to remember here is that we got a little piece of crud or something in there. Now we haven't final washed this block yet. We're definitely going to do that. We want to we did do an initial wash on it in the jet clean, but we want to put the bearings in before we do our final wash because there may be a little bit of metal that gets slightly scraped off these bearings as they go in. We want to make sure that all gets cleaned out of there. Now the other important thing is the oil galley slots. If you look at this bearing here, it's got an oil galley slot in it. Now there's a feed hole in this block that comes from the main journal here, and there's a passageway here from the main journal that feeds down right into this cam bearing. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is the passage here, and it comes through this hole up here on top. So the hole in the main bearing, look right down that hole, and I'll shine the light. You can see that the hole's going right down through. You can see my light down in there. So that hole is at 12 o'clock right here, and it goes directly down and feeds the cam bearing. Now, the point being, on my cam bearing oil slot needs to be in line with this oil galley. If I were to put this cam bearing in and that slot was off, what I would do is I would actually block off this passage, and my camshaft would get no oil. If you do that, you're gonna destroy your motor shortly after starting it. You can kiss that engine goodbye. So I know that on the Fords, on any particular motor, this is true. You need to line the cam bearing oil holes or slots up with the oil galley hole in the block. I know that on the Fords, all of the cam bearing oil galley holes are at 12 o'clock if the block is upside down, which it is right now. So we're going to take our bearing right here, and we're going to put it in here. We're just going to expand our tool out inside the bearing, because that's how this tool works. We just spin this and it expands it out. We're just going to push our bearing up there and get it flush against the tool. Now I want to make sure that my oil slot here, and you can see the oil slot on the bearing here, I want to make sure that my oil slot is at 12 o'clock in line with this oil galley. As long as I do that, everything will be fine. So we've got that at 12 o'clock there. Now the other end of my tool here, come on over here and look at this down. We want to make sure that we take and we put our centering cone in the other end and make sure that we're perfectly centered. Make sure that this thing is snug on the bearing. My oil slot's at 12, and this acts just like a driver now. And we're going to take and we're going to drive this bearing in. Very gently. You don't have to kill this thing. So we're going to drive that bearing right in until it's flush. Now on this rear bearing, you may have to take your tool out and verify your location. I don't think we're in far enough, and the way that you verify that is you very simply take your tool, come on up here and look down the hole again. I'll take my light, oh and look at that, we are there. If you look right down that hole, you can see the light. You can see my light down there. That means that my slot and my bearing is actually right in line with the oil galley. So my bearing is in. Come back here, you can see that my bearing is installed. My oil slot up here is where it needs to be, in line with the oil galley right up top. And so that means that bearing is installed correctly. And that's how you put the cam bearings in. Now we're going to continue to do that. I don't think I need to press all 5 of these in on video, because that might be a little repetition and boring for the viewer. But I wanted you to get the idea. We're going to go through and we're going to go to number 4 and number 3. Once we get to number 3 on this, what we're going to do is we're going to flip the block around, or in this case, I'm just going to walk around to the other side of the block, and I'm going to start driving the bearings on this side. I'm going to drive them in from this side so I can center the cone over here. Doesn't matter which end you drive them in from. The only thing that matters is that the oil galleys are lined up, they're in the right location, and then I have my centering cone centering that bearing so that my cam will fit when I'm done. So that's cam bearing installation. That's main bearing bore alignment, check, and cam bearing installation. So we'll get the rest of these cam bearings in. Once I get the cam bearings in, the reason I'm putting them in now is because number 1, you can't put the cam bearings in on the engine stand because you can't get to the bearing, can't get your tool in there. And the second thing is we're going to deck this or mill this block. In order to mill the block, the fixture manufacturer that we're using, they recommend that we have the cam bearings installed because their fixture, part of it installs in the cam tunnel, and they like to have the bearings in there so we have a real true fit for our fixture. So once we get the bearings in, we'll get this set up and we'll deck the surfaces and continue with this. So we'll see you then.